Look, brother, it's been ages, but we finally have company. I see that. We must entertain our guest. You're right. We have to be gracious hosts. What should we do? How do I know? We need to come up with something. Brother, our guest is sighing. Sigh? What is sigh? Well, a sigh is when...
Enough already! How long are you gonna keep carrying on like this? In case you didn't get the hint, I'll spell it out. You're a guest. Wants a new game. Got it?
The Devil May Cry series is an outdated piece of shit. The Devil May Cry series has quickly established itself as one of my favorite things in the world, and partaking in the community or a discourse about it has proven itself to be a great time, whether it comes to exchanging tech, gushing about one's favorite combo videos, or explaining XC to people cause you know damn sure the game won't. Sure, there were certain topics which could get
"Did you know DMC originally used to be RE4?"
repetitive, but the prospect of people coming together and sharing their passion about this series, their criticisms, along with wishes and ideas for a new DMC game was always really exciting. But this video isn't about new games now, is it?
Is there a game you would like to see completely remade with the latest technology? I think Devil May Cry should be in here.
Remakes are a topic so hot in recent times it could make Burial blush, and unfortunately the DMC series has also fallen victim to it to a shocking extent, with somehow it feels like half the discussions surrounding it within the past 2 years always finding their way back to some variation of demanding Capcom go back and for whatever reason give their previous titles another go. Now what these reasons may be can definitely vary from person to person, but while I may get relatively agitated at points in this video, my goal isn't to insinuate that people wanting to see their favorite games reinvigorated with modern technology somehow aren't true fans. I'm just here to tell you why you're dumb and wrong, and I hope Capcom crushes your dream! So structuring this essay is going to be a little hard, since generally people find themselves arguing about which DMC needs the remake treatment the most, with some wanting the trilogy wholesale, others going as far as including DMC4, and some only wishing for an individual title. For that reason, it may just be wisest to address each game in order, and maybe at the end bring it all together into some overarching point.
I feel like I learned something. Which would be great if I wasn't dead.
Enter DMC1. This is Dante. Or you may also call him Proto-Leon, because did you know that DMC used to be RE4? And while yes, I may joke about that phrase because of just how many variations people have found to lead back into this kid's first trivia fact.
Hey guys, sorry I'm just playing Resident Evil 4 right now. Oops, my mistake.
It tends to be an important factor that is frequently brought up when people's desires for a remake of one are voiced, both in the positive and in the negative. Essentially, people are into the atmosphere, however despise the camera with a violent passion. Personally, I can empathize with the latter, because while I may have little issue with it when traversing the world, except for maybe this fucking staircase, there undeniably are instances where you will find yourself just fighting an enemy or boss who's genuinely off-screen and chucking projectiles at you. Good luck dodging that. Whenever people make their point about the atmosphere though,
And maybe they would want to remake DMC 1? God damn, that would be so sick. I want Devil May Cry with the vibes of DMC 1. I really do.
then just... I quickly find myself thinking, and why exactly do you think a DMC being spooky necessitates a remake of 1? I will come back to this later, but keep it in mind. Of course, there are other avenues to see this through than just the presentation. DMC 1 and 2's combat engines are primitive in certain ways and have some ideas unique to them which largely faded away after 3 basically reinvented the series and set in stone the control scheme you'd use to interface with the characters, it having remained practically identical ever since. So there is certainly an allure to bringing them forth to that modern standard and allowing Dante to use all the abilities which are now iconic to him. And gameplay reasons aside, as we all know, DMC3 is the only game in this series with a story that's worth a damn, so there has been the demand to rewrite 1 and 2 to possibly fall better in line with the overall narrative which was later established. 2 itself obviously is the black sheep of the franchise, for some reason it's more valid than others, but no matter how you feel about it, Capcom is hilariously aware of its reputation. From what I've gathered, the majority of demand towards remaking it specifically comes from the notion that it deserves to be redeemed, to no longer serve as the stain on the series you recommend newcomers to avoid. The question is, what does DMC2 actually have to offer that's worth redeeming? Despite what I said above regarding DT exclusive specials or 2's DT amulet and strongly alterated combo chains, technically the ideas that you introduced mechanically have been pretty much extracted and iterated upon in later titles. An exception you could name being the shotgun style chains, where pressing shoot after a certain number of sword swings would result in unique animations, which I could see having an appeal to some people.
Oh god. Oh god! The stance!
But personally, I appreciate DMC's instant access to the majority of attacks on their own unique inputs, so I think Gunslinger style is simply a superior avenue for adding Gankata stuff over things descending into Dante having to go YYXYX to do a specific move with Ebony and Ivory at the end. Arius is a big nothing burger, with the only memorable part about him really being how his voice changes entirely last second and gives maybe the most hilarious performance the world has ever seen. And despite some cool designs, and select opponents which may actually even be really fun to tackle with characters who don't control like dog shit, the majority of enemies and bosses really don't fare too well, with the infamous example on the forefront of everyone's mind of course being the utter atrocity of game design that is the Infested Chopper. And when that is the extent of what the game has to offer, is it really that appealing of a proposition to blow an entire 5-year dev cycle on trying to make all this baggage coming along with DMC2 not suck? On the other hand, if you think it's bad and wish for all of it to be changed, then what is it you actually want? Why remake DMC2 in the first place if nothing besides the plain void of its scenario remains the same? If you raised your hand to bring up Lucia and how she deserved better, I will remind you how in that one DMC5 prequel novel I never read, Dante and Lucia worked together to defeat Balrog. She has not been forgotten by Capcom and is still around, so why exactly should Lucia being featured in another title necessitate a remake of 2? So 3. Yeah, the structure of this video really ain't great. Honestly, this is the remake I least understand the desire for. It has its fair share of flaws, but despite that it's pretty much the entire package in gameplay and story. The only thing genuinely holding it back is its limited loadout feature, which actually does stop me from sticking with it a lot of the time, simply because of how strange it feels to play this Dante and be denied access to all his facets, which already exist within the actual game itself. Fortunately, however, there is absolutely no need to remake the whole game to remedy this shortcoming, as for ages now people have modded style switching into 3, and even Capcom themselves made an official style switcher for the Nintendo Switch version a couple years back, on the day where we all were hoping our boy was going to be announced for Smash.
Shush, maybe it's a trick. Dante's about to come out.
Making this feature more widely available by patching it into the HD collection or, although a bit scummy, making it its own separate release on other platforms would genuinely be enough. As modded gameplay of 3 shows, when Dante's chains are taken off, his dusty 2005 PS2 self can still easily dunk on practically any game coming out to this day in creative expression and style potential, making a full-blown remake completely unnecessary. Unless the insistence lies purely on wanting to see all the cool cutscenes redone in modern graphics, which I genuinely consider a waste of time. 3 definitely does contain the most entertaining choreography and deliveries the series has to offer, it probably being a large part of why we all fell in love with Dante in the first place, but that's more so when 4 and 5 for toning things down in areas where they should have stayed just as crazy. Instead of wishing for a 3 remake, maybe just hope the next DMC returns to 3's wild creativity and has more to show for itself than just one funny hat dance. While the DMC 4 remake isn't brought up as much as the others, I still heard of it often enough to give my 2 cents real quick. In short, they had their chance with Special Edition. It was the perfect opportunity to stop 4 from being the transparently incomplete game that it turned out to be, yet they spent it purely on redesigning Virgil instead of adding any new story content, missions, or enemies. Yes, it sucks that it's in the state that it's in, and the idea of what could have been if Dante's lack of a half had been able to see the attention it needed is a nice fantasy, but after so long and their second attempt already wasted, I see no point in asking them to re-release it yet another time and hope that now they get around to fleshing out where it's figuratively starving. So I'm fine with 4 continuing to just be the beautiful flawed mess that it is, while Capcom moves on to new avenues. But what do I mean by said new avenues? Well, this is where we get back to a couple of the points I told you to hold on earlier. Of course, there's the obvious route of making a Devil May Cry 6. The general consensus on what that may entail, however, can differ quite drastically from person to person. Some people wish for an entirely dedicated Nero solo game, a lot of others cannot see the series working without Dante. Personally, I am of 2 minds on this, as I do think that 5 sets up a break from Dante and Virgil quite strongly, and if you were ever gonna do a game about Nero just going on a big adventure without any ties to the Sparta family, it would be now. However, I do also firmly believe that Dante is the most fun playable character ever conceived for a video game, and not including him into a DMC would drastically limit its possibility space and potential for meta development.
Thanks.
One idea that has been brought up by several people was the next DMC be titled Dante's Inferno, or the Divine Comedy. The focus being on Dante and Virgil traversing the 9 cycles of hell, in a way finally paying homage to the story their names originated from as they seek a way back home. It would practically necessitate Virgil finally being a playable character during the main campaign for once, meaning he could see his own missions and bosses, along with hopefully finally expanding upon his weapon selection. His handling during 5's story somewhat disappointed me, so I'd also hope during their journey through hell, him and Dante could finally get some poignant moments again. Maybe expanding upon certain elements which were either just hinted at or opportunities which were missed out on in previous titles, dramatizing their storyline a little in ways which it hasn't been before. I know that Dante is very reserved about his true emotions, but we've never really gotten anything concrete on him killing Nilo, and him going to kill Virgil at the end of 5 was presented in such a routine way as if he didn't even care, when in 3, while determined, you could clearly tell he was giving Virgil every chance he could, and was devastated over not being able to save him. If 6 could elaborate on that and give reason to believe Dante had almost disassociated to basically try avoid having to go through the pain of losing his brother for, the 4th time? Then that could retroactively heighten the emotional stakes of the duel from 5 somewhat, which to me it's strongly lacking in. Or maybe it's just because of this snooze fest of a song. Still not sure why they didn't go for the obvious route of reincorporating 3's leitmotif when Devils Never Cry practically is their theme. In any case, one reason I figure so many people hunger for remakes of DMC 1 through 3 is because they want another Dante-centered game. Famously, Dante has been voted the #1 favorite Capcom character, and while I do like Nero, Itsuno's attitude did seem a little unfair, as he said there were no stories really left to tell with Dante, when the Dante that we all think of when you hear the name only ever really got one game to himself and has taken more of a backseat to Nero since. You could argue they have basically gotten an equal amount of attention, meaning it's not unreasonable to expect more from Dante before being willing to let him go in favor of the new blood. Thing is, while I want another game with just Dante as well, I don't see why that should necessitate a remake. Don't forget that DMC 3 already decided to take place at an earlier point in the timeline, and by doing so made for the best story of the series, as well as retroactively making Nilo's appearance one a lot more meaningful. So there shouldn't be an issue with DMC 6 taking place before Nero ever came into Dante's life to take a bulk of the attention. A game set between 3 and 1, or 1 and 2 for example, could be very fun, but personally I think one between 2 and 4 has incredibly unique potential to make something interesting of Dante's mood switch, recontextualizing it and showing how he eventually got back out of the dark place he was in. Only that instead of being forced to try salvage 2's missions and scenario, they would be able to do something entirely original within the confines of fleshing out that period of Dante's arc. It was brought to my attention the other day that apparently somehow he had taken on Lucifer and Pandora before 4, so this could be a good spot to give both of those their well-deserved boss fights, similarly to how 5 included Artemis and Gilgamesh, while also being able to come up with entirely new ones, along with interesting new enemy types and brand new weapons like the set of playing cards I believe I heard Itsuno mention at one point, some other bullshit only the people at Capcom could come up with, and maybe Dante's silly coin as some sort of ultra kill style projectile you could bounce all over the place. The unrestrained dabbling across the chronology could also be made clever use of in the previously addressed Dante's Inferno. Just because I think a remake of one would be a stupid waste of time, doesn't mean that one Virgil flashback mission where you potentially control Nilo Angelo wouldn't be a sick way to delve into his character and make for unique new gameplay opportunities. And of course, the big one when looking back through DMC would be finally making the fabled Sparta prequel. They could even get unemployed pants-ripping Kamiya to join and give his own input, probably creating something new and exciting, which plays unlike any other character in this series as it is today. But that's also why I'd want him to keep his hands off of Dante and never touch him again. Yes, I wrote the script before the Game Awards. Kamiya being back at Capcom only makes the Sparta prequel more obvious in my opinion, but I will reiterate that I do not want him messing with Dante, as I fear he'd likely receive a massive overhaul to a Bayonetta-style dial combo system with witch time dodges on R2 and all that other stuff Kamiya likes to put in his games. And while all that stuff isn't bad per se, in fact it seems to be preferred by the majority of the industry, doing so would betray the one-of-a-kind mechanical identity that this series constructed for itself since 2005. And I don't think a change this drastic should be allowed on anything but a brand new character, such as what Sparta would be. Maybe I should eventually make a little video on the differences of DMC and Platinum stuff, by the way. The Ladies' Night teaser from the end of 5 could finally be followed up on as its own little spin-off game, it being practically forced to expand on both the girls, which is gonna be a topic for another time, since Dante has rendered them bare of their trademark weapons. And because women, it could be the perfect chance to reintroduce Lucia to the series and have the three of them taking on a job together. And one idea I've had for a while, which since has unfortunately been tarnished a bit by DMC Pinnacle of Cash Grab coming out, was that you could simply make a game just about a normal day in the life for Dante, structured somewhat similarly to the original anime, just featuring several random jobs he took on across the years, with no real consideration needed for an overarching story, but just fully committing to coming up with a cool idea and basing a nice chunky set of missions around it. Something of this sort would be the perfect way to counter something like 5 strongly repetitive visuals by just ensuring a lot of different locations would come into play. From a demon overrun ghost town with possibly more open-ended level design, to maybe an old-school train going across the countryside, transforming into a steam-firing mecha DMC2 infested chopper style. They could really do whatever they wanted, this including a pair of missions set on a new spooky castle to get those oh-so-desired DMC1 Resident Evil vibes back, maybe only this time really tripling down on the oppressive horror atmosphere, causing for even greater catharsis when you stylishly air combo your way through the nightmare in front of you, cheekily taunting as demons scream bloody murder your way. See, it's not that hard, dude. I offhandedly used the word time quite a bit throughout this essay, but I want to call attention to it for a moment. This may sound obvious, but games take time to make. A legitimately scary amount of time. DMC5 released 11 years after 4 did. Even if you want to be nice and consider the reboot came in between, there was still a 6-year gap. And V may have been but 2 days old when 5 first came out, but at this point, he's preparing for elementary school. The role that time plays in my argument cannot be understated. If you people so excited for these remakes get what you want, no matter which game comes first, they're gonna do the whole trilogy. The next 2 decades of your life would be spent exclusively waiting for Capcom to rehash and put slight spins on games which you have already played and enjoyed. Some of the suggestions I made throughout this video you may not have been a fan of, and that is understandable. I'm not some genius game dev. But I legitimately don't see how there can really be any argument for how that scenario of waiting for DMC 1 again and DMC 2 again before a DMC 3 remake eventually drops in 2040 would be in any way superior to Capcom simply making an all-new game with full creative freedom. And I hope that, even if my ideas might not have been what you may personally wish for from the series, you can at least agree with me on that. A quick thing I just remembered was the argument that the remakes would be a great way to get newcomers into the series. Some even going as far as to say they have to remake the games to get people interested in playing them. But looking at the sales numbers debunks this quite easily. DMC5 is the best-selling game of the franchise by a significant margin, pretty much proving that even if a long-numbered entry newly releases as part of a series, as long as it's a good game, people will jump into it, regardless of whether they played the previous titles and experienced the story leading up to it or not. And I'd argue it's also a lot more likely for these people to then later go through the games they missed out on and seeing what they're all about, than it would be if they got into the series via a DMC1 remake, which would instead just leave them waiting for the sequel to be remade first until it'd be tolerable for them to return. So again, why waste the time remaking the older DMCs to allure newcomers when a DMC 6 would sell just as well? And if someone newly gets into the series via that entry, but genuinely can't bring themselves to play through anything that came out before the PS4 generation for whatever reason, then I guess that's their problem, I don't know. Still the same amount of copies sold. At last, I want to jump back to that poll mentioned earlier, during which Dante was voted the #1 Capcom character and DMC5 the #1 Capcom game. The Capcom Super elections from earlier this year allowed fans to make their voices somewhat heard in what they desired from the future of the company, and amongst criteria designed with just enough freedom for me to try to remind them that Okami and God Hand exist. Holy shit, we're finally getting the proper Okami sequel. I'm so happy I haven't been able to stop smiling the whole week. The poll also had a dedicated section asking participants for what remakes they'd be interested in. Devil May Cry was an option among the section asking for sequels, not, however, the one for remakes. This could mean either of two things. Option 1. Capcom are holding firmly to what I also believe would be the best for the series and not allowing DMC to become part of their remake craze, instead wanting every entry to be an original experience and to just focus on making for the best stylish action gameplay the industry has to offer. Option 2. Understandably, after the constant demand for it, a Devil May Cry remake of some sort has already long been settled on and is currently in development. Whichever of the two it turns out to be, this video doesn't matter. Even less so than the 1.5 years ago when I initially got the idea to make it, because then there would have at least been some slight chance to convince the masses and therefore also influence Capcom's decision. But even if for nothing else, it felt good to finally get my feelings out on the matter and hopefully offer a reasonable counterpoint to those who insist on DMC remakes, or to those who just think I'm a crazy person anytime I start violently foaming out the mouth when the topic is brought up. I tend to feel this way about most remakes in general, but I thought this specified essay could provide a bit more insight since I could focus on just the game series I care most about instead of needing to talk in a broader sense. People asking for remakes of something like Infamous or Spider-Man Web of Shadows bother me just as much though. Just make sure the old game is openly available on modern platforms and make a sequel. I occasionally get the impression this modern culture of remaking everything has genuinely made some people forget that sequels are even an option. That said, if any sort of DMC remake does come out, don't treat it as some kinda gotcha moment when I play and likely enjoy it. Of course, at this point I will take anything I can get, but that doesn't nullify how much worse it would be than the alternative I just extensively laid out. Also, I'm not claiming any of these games are perfect. In fact, a lot of what I'm gonna be doing on this channel in the future is critically examining the things I love, or am interested in. So me shitting on DMC3 at some point, or lining out the issues I have with the responsiveness of 1, doesn't mean that I changed my mind and am in the remake camp as well now. In any case, that's where I'm leaving you off for today. Now that this project has been handled, I plan to delve into relearning DMC5 and making a very special fight, the idea of which has been floating around my head for 3 years at this point. Can't promise it's gonna turn out as sick as I'm hoping, but I'll give it my all, so hopefully some of you will stick around to watch that. If you enjoy hearing me rant about things no one cares about, I'd appreciate it if you went and checked out my Spider-Man PS4 parkour critique. And I should have probably put this earlier among me listing possible sequels and spin-offs, but of course, if you have any personal ideas, or one of my suggestions gave you inspiration for something they could do, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. No, this is not just me begging for engagement so this video hits more than 300 views in a year. Ich habe nicht die Stimme für diese Art von Sache.